The Cleveland Cavaliers may be the key to a Brandon Ingram trade, but they could also be the reason why he stays in New Orleans or this saga drags out a little bit. We'll break it down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Wednesday, and we're going to look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, how they might be the key to a Brandon Ingram trade, but also the reason maybe nothing happens at all. We're going to find out which way it's going to play out. Then we'll look at Tyler Smith. That is an off-requested name forward from the G League Ignite. Polarizing prospect. I'm curious what you think about him. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, where there's over 10,000 Pelicans fans as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. If you are an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. I appreciate y'all. That's awesome. We're giving you draft coverage you can't get anywhere else here, as well as looking at the trade market and figuring out what the Pelicans are going to do this off season. So this off season's key, and it's key because David Griffin, at the end of his season media availability, talked a little bit about how this isn't a summer for complacency, was his word. They want to shake some things up. The easiest way to do that is a Brandon Ingram trade. Look, I know that upsets people, some people, Brandon Ingram fans, but talking about what the team is likely going to do and what the team is interested in doing doesn't mean I necessarily want him gone. I'm fine with keeping him too. It's just the reality of the situation, so we got to keep talking about it. One of the teams that it seems like could be a location that he could be traded to, the Cleveland Cavaliers, might be the first domino that really needs to fall with all of this. Like, when you think about it, what exactly is going on with the Cleveland Cavaliers? Right now, they're trying to sign Donovan Mitchell, their superstar, to an extension. And if they do they then trade Darius Garland? It's been reported that his representation, Clutch, would like him dealt if that's the case. Do they keep him? You're hearing a lot of negotiating through the media. It's like smoke screen season here in the lead up to the NBA draft. And you have Brian Windhorst go on WKNR the other day and kind of talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers and what's going on there a lot. And it sounds like they would like to keep their core four guys. That's Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, and Evan Mobley. It's a little bit weird. Those four guys play two positions. You have two guards and two centers, big men, essentially. So that's why they've naturally come up as a team that could potentially trade for Brandon Ingram. They actually need a lot of help on the wing, and they don't have it. So Ingram makes sense sending him there for one or a combination of those players or other players. I don't think a lot of the deals there, if they're not trading Mitchell, really do it for me. I like Jarrett Allen a lot. I don't know if I'd like to trade Brandon Ingram for Jarrett Allen. You could have done that at the trade deadline. That was on the table for New Orleans, and they said no. So I don't know if that's going to get it done. So here's the two ways this goes. Say that Mitchell signs an extension and they don't want to trade anyone else. There's a positive impact of that. It should drive up the price of Brandon Ingram. It's simple at that point, supply and demand. You want a talented one-time borderline all-star player? Well, you can't get Garland, you can't get Allen, you can't get Mobley, you can't get Mitchell. Can I interest you in a Brandon Ingram? That's kind of the way that you are looking at that. I had it planned out and I forgot to do it. I wanted to reenact the Special Man commercial for that right there when talking about Brandon Ingram. That would have been funny. Anyway, you can imagine it. So it's, as I said, supply and demand. They just took 4 tradable guys off the table. So teams that are looking to improve, that maybe liked one of those guys, are now going to turn their attention more to Brandon Ingram. So in theory, on one side of this could drive up his market. which then thus drives up the price. More people are interested in Brandon Ingram. You can probably trade him more. This is all very good news for the New Orleans Pelicans. And teams that are interested in trading for him are also going to have to pay more because you can't use the Cleveland Cavaliers as leverage. I want you to keep that statement in mind for later, for the next segment, because that is important on the flip side of this, because there is a negative to this as well. But if teams are wanting to dramatically shake something up, Brandon Ingram is available, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, and Evan Mobley are not. And there's only like so many guys, right? When you look around this, and this is why it's, we're kind of focusing on the same teams, it's tough to figure out some of these kind of superstar level trades. And to be perfectly honest, they tend to kind of come out of nowhere where you won't see them coming. So you could see this driving up the price for Brandon Ingram. That's important because if they don't get a good offer for Ingram, they're likely going to look to sign him to an extension. So if none of these offers are there, you've got to look to try and sign him to something. And if he's only going to sign for a near max or a max, like you almost have to do it. You cannot let him go into this season with as an expiring deal. One, then he could leave for nothing in free agency next year. Or if you try and trade him at the trade deadline and he's got 6 months left on his contract, your offers are going to plummet. You've got to kind of strike when the value is the most. We've talked a lot about this on Locked On Pelicans, especially if you're an everydayer, you know it. It's a small market. You need to manage your assets well. Every team in the NBA needs to do that, but particularly in a small market team where you one, wouldn't be attracting guys in free agency anyway. Two, free agency doesn't really exist like it once did in the NBA, and the majority of good players move teams via trade, not by signing in free agency anymore. It doesn't really work like that. And you don't have cap space to sign anyone in the first place. So making the most of these assets of your players and getting the most value for them is a very important thing. One side of this is it drives up that price for Brandon Ingram. Maybe the Atlanta Hawks were interested in Jarrett Allen, Garland, one of those guys. They could trade Trae Young for them. Not anymore. Not anymore, you can't. So now you've got to turn your eyes back to the New Orleans Pelicans and Brandon Ingram. That means price goes up. They lose a lot of leverage in negotiations because you can't go, well, okay, whatever. We'll stop trading for Ingram here because you're asking for too much, and now we're going to go trade for these other guys. That threat doesn't work if they're not going to trade him. That's only good for the New Orleans Pelicans. But here's the thing. I do think it can complicate a trade for Brandon Ingram and either mean one doesn't happen or this drags out a little bit. Let's look at the flip side of this and how it could impact in a negative way a Brandon Ingram trade. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, life can be hard. Sometimes things just weigh on you. They get you down. It starts to impact your life, your relationships, going to work, all of those things. You don't want that. You need to get some help for it. And that's what therapy can do. Yeah, you can talk to your friends, but sometimes it's just great to get an impartial third party here to look at you, talk with you, and help you figure out solutions. Because life doesn't come with an instruction manual. So therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. And that's why I love BetterHelp, because it's convenient, flexible, designed to be suited around your schedule. You don't need to go and drive to a doctor's office. That might stop you from going. It's a lot of work at times, right? Just getting out of the house, going and doing things. Do it from the comfort of your own home because BetterHelp is entirely online. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, how's the audio sound? I think I figured out on the new laptop what was causing the issue. And I think from my tests, it sounded much better. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube or on Twitter @NolaJake. And now for your second listen, mandatory minicamp has started for the Saints. Ross Jackson is there, boots on the ground, eyes on the field, breaking down everything you need to know about the black and gold. Go listen to Locked On Saints and Ross Jackson as your second listen today. So we're talking about a Brandon Ingram trade and how the Cleveland Cavaliers are maybe the key to a deal getting done or now not getting done. Let's look at that. I think this could complicate a Brandon Ingram trade, meaning one doesn't happen or this gets dragged out. More on the timeline in a second here. So we said, if you wanted an all-star, you really want to shake up your roster, maybe now, since you can't get one of those guys, you turn to Brandon Ingram. I think that's a possibility, but I also think if teams are uncertain about Brandon Ingram, because you need to factor in his contract too. You're not just trading for Brandon Ingram. You're trading for a guy that you likely are going to need to give a max deal to ensure he doesn't walk in a year. That is something that will scare teams away. So if teams are uncertain, I don't necessarily think this is going to make them do a deal, make a trade because they feel they have to. We're going to get to the leverage part here in a second. You don't like Brandon Ingram as a player. You don't think he fits. You don't think he shoots enough threes, whatever it might be. Well, that means you're probably not going to trade for him. Even if you can't get Darius Garland, it just means you're going to wait. That drags out this process. That could even scare suitors away, right? And that might mean, while we're not necessarily expecting a deal to get done by the NBA draft, that's kind of the upcoming deadline. And as I've talked a lot about on the show, this league is a deadline-focused league. You can't then scour for better deals when you've got to get it done by a certain day. You just got to take what's there or not. But teams might not. That happens plenty of times too. The Toronto Raptors did that for a couple of years with Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. Didn't work out for him, but that's how it goes. So keep that in mind too, that if teams were iffy about Brandon Ingram, I don't think that means they're going to be like, well, we got to go get him now because we can't get any of the guys from the Cavaliers. What it truly does mean is teams negotiating with the Pelicans over Ingram lose leverage. But nothing says they have to get a deal done just because those other guys are off the market. That's what I meant about the leverage part in the last segment. You lose leverage because you can't pivot to them or use them as a threat and be like, knock down your price a little bit, because we'll go trade for one of them otherwise. But if you make it right, we'll take Brandon Ingram. You can't do that, and that's an advantage for New Orleans, but you don't have to get a deal done if you don't believe in the player. You just can't get a discount. That, I think, is also important. The other side of this, and this is where we get a little weird with it for a second, right? By them taking Mitchell, Garland, Allen, Mobley off the table, it takes away a trade partner for New Orleans, right? That stuff where we said you can't pivot to the Cleveland Cavaliers and say like, oh, we're going to go trade for those guys. New Orleans can't do that now, right? You can't be discussing things with the Atlanta Hawks and be like, we want Trae Young. And they're like, well, we'll give you Murray. And it's like, well, then never mind. We'll just go get Darius Garland, because Darius Garland's not on the table here. It takes an actual trade partner away from New Orleans, because you could construct like 8 different trades with the Cavaliers that I think make sense and are realistic here for Brandon Ingram. But now you don't have that. So the Pelicans lose that leverage, but not only do they lose the leverage in negotiations with others, which might kill a deal, because if they're like, no, this isn't the value we want for Brandon Ingram, so we're not going to trade him, you also can't actually trade him to the Cavaliers, a team that the fit for Brandon Ingram makes a ton of sense. And even if they were open to it, let's get into the coaching stuff. James Borrego is rumored to maybe be the front runner for the Cleveland Cavaliers head coaching job, and even in, with the Lakers. And from talking to a couple people with the Pelicans the other day, it sounds like they're kind of assuming he's going to be gone next year and going to get one of those 2 jobs. Now, nothing's happened yet. And Windhorst on that same radio station reported that Borrego was in Cleveland Tuesday and Wednesday, I believe, or Monday and Tuesday, one of those. So it looks like maybe things are moving more in that direction. But also factor in Borrego's relationship in 1 year here in New Orleans with Brandon Ingram. It was weird last year, right? Ingram having very much a down season, and something that we and like everybody has talked about. Not really running the offense that Borrego was brought in to basically install. And it's weird because it should have fit Ingram. When I talked to him at Media Day, I asked him, I was like, have you been in communication with Borrego? Like, what's that offense going to look like? And his answer to me was like, they're going to put the ball in my hands. He was excited about it, but it didn't, for whatever reason, none of that really fit. Like I said, everything was just clunky and off last year, and they more or less abandoned Borrego's offense. And other people have reported on that too. This is kind of like an open secret around the team. If he becomes the head coach in Cleveland, even if they were open to trading these people, right? Does he want Ingram? Like, maybe. Who knows exactly what their relationship is, right? We're not there behind the scenes every day, but it seems like maybe that isn't the direction that they would want to go. The Detroit Pistons, a rumored destination for Brandon Ingram. And Kuka Hill, the host of Locked On Pistons, and I went on his show to talk about that, seemed to be really liking the idea of trading for Brandon Ingram and putting someone next to Cade Cunningham. Great, let's get a deal done. But now they've got Trajan Langdon as their president of basketball operations, or whatever his title is, running the show there. Will he want Brandon Ingram? All of a sudden, things are looking like maybe the market isn't as robust as we were hoping for. And that's, a good or bad thing, depending on how you want to look at it. There's still options, but this is why I'm saying I don't know if a deal is going to get done by the draft, right? Donovan Mitchell, who had more years left on his contract and so thus was safer to trade to the Cleveland Cavaliers, that trade didn't happen until September. So don't panic if a deal doesn't get done on draft night. Don't panic if it doesn't get done at the start of free agency. You have plenty of time, and these deals tend to just be evolutions. And so while the draft makes sense to have a trade done by then, it's not the actual trade deadline, and nothing has to get done by that day or nothing else is happening. That's worth keeping in mind here too. You don't have to get a deal done right away. You can wait a little bit with this sort of thing. So while I still think it's more likely than not that Brandon Ingram gets traded, I'm not like he's definitely gone, because when you look at kind of the market forces, the market factors with this, the Cavaliers, and who knows what they really mean. This is a lot of like smokescreen type of season where take everything with a grain of salt. And that's why we're looking at both sides of this here. Could go either way. They still might trade people. And maybe it is they hire Borrego and Borrego's like, I really want this guy. But also, if your front office doesn't want him, even as a head coach, they're not going to get him for you, right? Like, the front office is going to build the roster, and whoever's the head coach is going to come in and they're going to just coach the roster that you're often given. That's how it works, right? Coaches have some power, some say in all of this, but not the final decision. And the Pelicans front office being very collaborative, I think that's important, but Willie Green is the head coach, not the front office. Borrego is the head coach, not the front office. So it's all factored in, but they're going to try and make the roster that they want to make and do the best deal that they think they can go out and do. We'll see if it's Brandon Ingram or not. Do you think this complicates or helps a Brandon Ingram trade? Let me know in the comments down below what you think. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about the NBA draft, a name that's come up a lot that I am very iffy on. I'll be honest with you. I don't particularly love this player, but I see the appeal with someone like him. And that's Tyler Smith, a forward from the G League Ignite, young potential 3-and-D guy. Always want more of those. Let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on it all on FanDuel. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. The Dallas Mavericks are favored by 1.5 going into Game 3 tonight, Wednesday. Feeling good about their chances? Or you think Boston is just going to more or less slam the door? Get in on the action. -1.5 is the line for the Dallas Mavericks in this one. I think the Celtics are going to take it. That's kind of the way I'm feeling. Or get it on the MVP, like NBA Finals MVP futures. Drew Holiday still looking like a good dark horse there. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And you can use it to bet on anything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 10,000. That's an incredible number. Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Go laugh at the Lakers and listen to yesterday's show, not getting Dan Hurley. They got embarrassed here. And if you're tired of all that just yelling sports talk that's not actually sports talk, do you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube with a free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's switch gears. This is an off-requested name of a prospect profile, and that's Tyler Smith of the G League Ignite. This is a guy who's young. He's not even 20 years old yet. He's good size. He's 6'9", but 6'11" in shoes with a 7'1" wingspan. He's a forward. I don't totally view him as a center. He's more of a forward to me. He's got the size, the tools, the athleticism to kind of be like a 3-and-D guy. I get it. I see why people really like him, but I would not draft him if I were the Pelicans. First and foremost, he's very developmental. Very developmental. This is a very raw prospect. Again, when you look at his shooting form, it's good. It's pretty good. The release is very quick, and as a spot-up shooter, this guy can launch it, and he'll make shots. He will definitely make shots. I don't know if he's going to be the most consistent. Down low, he can bang in the paint a little bit as a post player. And he's got a couple of different moves. He's got a nice little turnaround, and he can hit kind of those face-up shots over smaller defenders, particularly with that good size that he has. And with that size, basically 7 feet in shoes, 6'11" in shoes, a good wingspan, and his NBA Combine metrics were phenomenal for the most part. You feel like he would be able, because he has good lateral movement, to switch and defend multiple positions. The height, the wingspan tells you rim protection. 3-and-D forward. That's a useful thing. So a couple of things here with him that make me nervous about him as a prospect. I don't know if I buy the 3-point shooting. It wasn't on insane volume, and he was very streaky at times. He actually finished 4 for 22 in his final 22 shots from 3. That's not a particularly good number. Shot 36% in the G League Ignite, with the G League Ignite this past season. But when you look at some of his other numbers, the free throw percentage in particular, 73%, that does not scream to me like good shooter. That number, you'd like it to be closer to 80%. And if you're a longtime listener or an everydayer of Locked On Pelicans, you know that free throw shooting is often that number that is the one that's more indicative of 3-point shooting in the NBA. I'm not totally sure if I just really buy into his shooting ability. If it's there, that's great, and he can turn into something special, but he's not great defensively. He seems very lost out there at times. You're going to really need to work with him on that. And beyond the 3-point shooting, I don't love him as a scorer. I don't think this is a guy that has tons of moves. He doesn't really have the athleticism or the handle to drive to the basket. He's not a good finisher at the rim unless he's dunking. So the layups, right? That touch you see with Zion Williamson, none of that really exists for him. And then when you look at him with the Ignite this season, he didn't start many games. He started, I think it was 2 games this season. He was an off-the-bench kind of guy. It just feels like he needs another year and solid production. The talent's there, but I feel like he needs more before I'm really willing to kind of jump in and be like, oh, okay, I totally see it with this guy. He only had 1 game with double digits rebounding this season. When you even put it at per 36 minutes, it wasn't double digits. It was 8.3. He averaged 5.1. None of those are particularly great numbers that I feel really good about when it comes to him. So I get the idea of a 3-and-D forward, but he's not a center, and that's the direction the Pelicans really need some help. The way I would see him used on this team is kind of like a backup to Zion. They don't really have that bigger guy. You see Trey play there. You've seen Ingram play there. You see Herb play there too at times. And you could throw a different look out there with Tyler Smith. You could have him back up Zion and play with whoever your starting center is. Having a court spacer with the center when you take Zion out wouldn't be a bad thing. Zion's not a three-point shooter, so adding in a three-point shooting threat at that position, that's definitely an intriguing and not a bad thing to have. That's a different look that you could throw at teams. You could potentially play him with Larry if he develops into a rim protector too, where you kind of have both of them kind of splitting that small ball 5 role. He's the power forward, Larry is the center. There's potential for something like that, but I don't think he's going to do that next season. And I've said the Pelicans probably need to get a guy that's going to help them right away. This is a key year. Every year is a key year. Every year's been a key year since they've drafted Anthony Davis, to be fair. So I don't know if this guy is just the right fit. I like him enough as a prospect. I wouldn't take him necessarily in the top 20. He's very raw. I get the idea of it, but I think the idea of him is better than who he's going to be as a player. The three-point shooting is real. That's a useful guy to have. The tools come together. That's great. But, this could end up as just like a Jackson Hayes kind of guy who's hyper athletic, can shoot the ball well, but doesn't give you much else. And that's what worries me. That's what worries me. If he was like, just more, had more court awareness, more basketball IQ compared to how Dalton Knecht looks when we talked about him yesterday, that's the type of thing that worries me, and I just don't necessarily see him as being the type of guy that the Pelicans would want to draft potentially. Maybe that might change. We'll see, depending on how workouts and other things go. And in the lead up to the draft, there's still a lot of time for things to change. A lot of time for things to change. But some of the stuff about him just doesn't scream to me as the type of guy that I would like to see on this team. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to make it easy to trade Brandon Ingram? Harder. Where's James Borrego go? I got so many questions for y'all. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Trade target Thursday tomorrow. And I got a name you're probably not expecting. I don't know if you guys are going to like it either. We'll find out. It's going to be a fun show. Trade target Thursday. Looking forward to it. We're going to look at that coming up in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all for that tomorrow.